gunmen opened fire during prayers at a mosque on Sunday evening. Now, according to witnesses, there were 3 gunmen who opened fire at about 40 people inside the Quebec City Islamic Cultural Center. So far, 8 people have been hurt. Now, in the firing, police have also put up a security perimeter around that mosque and have refused to comment about the incident. 2 people have been arrested in connection with the terror attack. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has condemned the shooting, calling it a terror attack. He says, quote, "We condemn this terrorist attack on Muslims in a center of worship and refuge. Muslim Canadians are an important part of our national fabric, and these senseless acts have no place in our communities, cities, and country." Quebec had been in the news recently for a political debate over banning the niqab for Muslim women. Well, Quebec is Canada's largest province, and it came under terror attack, as we just talked about, where gunmen sprayed bullets at a congregation. Innocent lives lost in Quebec City. It is also the provincial capital. As we mentioned, 6 people killed, 8 badly hurt. 2 people taken into custody. Now, the big question at this point is the motive. Why? Why at this time, and why this specific mosque? Justin Trudeau has not minced his words, calling it an act of terror. We had our senior international correspondent, Padma Rao, to investigate and explain all of this.
It was a masterstroke just hours after the temporary visa ban against 7 Islamic countries by the United States went into force. Canada prides itself on its inclusiveness, and its Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, invoked just that spirit. To the thousands of refugees fleeing wars whom the US ban had left stranded at airports around the world, he tweeted an invitation to his country instead.
After that, we will have
Later, his immigration minister, Ahmed Hussein, read out the fine print.
We'll continue to ensure that our immigration system is about compassion, efficiency, and economic opportunity, and the protection of the health, safety, and security of Canadians. We welcome those fleeing persecution, terror, and war.
But then came the attack, a brutal one unleashed by gunmen inside a mosque in Canada's French-speaking Quebec. There were 40 men bent in prayer, some with small children. 6 persons were killed in a shower of bullets. Unexpected? Apparently not. Ottawa has been warning its citizens that at least 180 Canadians have joined terror groups overseas, of whom 60 extremists have returned to Canada. They are considered radicalized and dangerous. And at least 10 of those renegades have been from Quebec, the region that shares not only a language with France, but also quite a large population of Muslim immigrants from French-speaking North Africa. The Maghreb. This is a region from where large numbers of youth have joined various Islamist terror groups like the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. Predictably, there are at least 100 right-wing extremist groups targeting Muslims, and even 6 in Canada. A pig's head was placed outside a Quebec mosque last year. Months later, the white supremacist Ku Klux Klan went on a recruitment drive in British Columbia. They distributed bags of white rice and flyers that read, "White lives do matter." Whoever is found to be behind the latest terror attack at the Quebec mosque, it seems clear that even in the country famed for its racial and religious diversity, terrorism is here to stay. Padma Rao, WION.
Now, to get perspective on this story, let's now go straight to Canada, where we're joined by Yudhvir Jaswal. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We appreciate your time. Certainly a very devastating attack there, a terror attack on Canadian soil. 6 people killed at a mosque, a place they're supposed to feel safe. Now, can we, early to make some extrapolation, but with what's going on in the United States, with all the confusion with Trump's immigration ban and now this recent attack in Canada, how safe is it for immigrants in North America?
I don't think so. There are any major safety concerns, as our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he's already given assurance that Canada is certainly going to welcome people from all different faiths and backgrounds. He's actually encouraging people, yes, you can feel safe over here. As a matter of fact, our Immigration Minister, Ahmed Hussein, he was a Somalian refugee. He came from the very that Donald Trump has put a ban on those 7 countries. So Ahmed Hussain, our immigration minister of Canada, he's also said it very clearly that there is no confusion as far as if at all you have dual citizenship. So Canadians are exempt from any of these issues.
All right, let's now go to Shivs Mukherjee, who's joining us right here in New Delhi in the studio. Shivs, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. A former diplomat. We see this happening, unfolding, with the recent attack in Canada. A lot of people, students who want to go there, people who want to work there in these countries, in Canada, the United States, and with what's happening, how frustrating is that? How difficult is that for people to see what's unfolding in the land of opportunity, the land of dreams, with this recent terror attack?
Well, you're absolutely right. By itself, I don't think it would be so worrying because Canada has not been a fertile ground for terrorism within their country, either from radicalized Canadian citizens or from abroad. But given the context of terrorism, international terrorism hitting innocent people across the world, the series of incidents in the Middle East, not just the Middle East being aflame, but in Europe, and then, of course, the whole frenzy of action and reaction in the United States following Donald Trump's presidency, this assumes a larger significance. I think the reaction in Canada, as it was announced by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, is of course diametrically opposite to the kind of impulses being announced by the Trump government. I mean, here immediately the Prime Minister calls it a terror act, although I would say this is not a kind of mainstream terrorism attack against all kinds of innocent people. This is more, in fact, it is a terrorist attack, but more in the nature of a hate crime.
Right, specifically targeting Muslims.
Specifically targeting Muslims in a mosque.
Right.
It's a hate crime against those who are perceived to be terrorists by possibly white supremacists or people who've been radicalized the other way, rather than radicalized Islam. The reaction, of course, of the government is to be commended because in a situation like this, it is reassurance from the government that people tend to follow. So I would imagine, and I believe that this cannot be taken as something that reflects, that will prove to be dangerous to Canada in the long run. The situation is quite different in America. So when you say North America, I would distinguish between the situation in Canada and the situation in the United States. I would point to it as an isolated incident, which would probably be contained by the Canadian government with its liberal attitude towards this kind of situation. And on the other hand, the United States, where, not to put too fine a point on it,
right,
newly elected president is doing everything possible to very, very cold-bloodedly aim his policies at his own constituency, which elected him, which in fact makes America less safe, not more safe.
Interesting perspective. Let's now go to our correspondent standing by in London, Mandy Clark. Mandy, it's hard to certainly draw conclusions so early on in this equation. A very devastating situation unfolding with the protests and the clear outreach of help many people are taking, not just in the U.S., but also around the world. And then, a few days later, we see this happening in Canada. Can we say that certain situations like this where Muslims are being targeted now in Canada at this mosque could have been inspired by what happened in the United States with Trump's Muslim ban, or is that just speculation at this point?
I think we have to be, it was a planned terror attack with 3 people with firearms. It seems like they would have needed a bit more time to prepare an attack, but certainly it might stem from a reaction to the welcoming of the government. Of course, there are we don't know who is responsible. We don't know who was involved. All we know is that there were 3 gunmen. That's as much as we know. The speculation, of course, it would be a far-right group. Now, the worry is that these far-right groups have been growing in strength and numbers and in attacks across the Western world, across Europe and now in Canada, although we don't know who is responsible, and that is a real worry. So it's not just the worry, the American worry they see as Islamic terrorism and why they're clamping down, but North America, and obviously Canada in particular, has to look at systemic causes of the rise of this, perhaps the far right, where they're willing to commit murder at specific groups that they feel threatened by.
All right, Mandy, Yudhvir, and Shivs, we're going to get back to you guys in just a minute, but now to get some other perspective from WION's web correspondent, Jeff Halpern, who is joining us from the newsroom to get perspective on this story. Jeff, you're very politically active. You've lived in Canada, and you're now here in New Delhi. Let's talk about the political landscape of this most recent terror attack. Prime Minister Trudeau, they're welcoming all of those refugees from the U.S. visa ban that's halted in those 7 Islamic countries. But just hours later, we had to see that mosque in Quebec attacked. As we mentioned, Canada, very different from the United States, both in North America, but Canada usually perceived as a much more tolerant society, at least in recent days. Talk to us a little bit about what exactly is unfolding there. Is it more a growth happening of an organized extreme right-wing movement in Canada?
There is a right-wing scene for sure. There is a leadership for a Conservative Party going on right now, and there is some dog whistling by certain contenders. And yeah, I mean, there's less overt racism. I think the American style is different. You know, they're a brash, in-your-face country, and Canadians, you know, we credit ourselves for being polite. Really, it's that we're confrontation averse, and we just don't like being as in your face. So there's a lot of racism in Canada too. It's less overt, and you know, I mean, if there's Ku Klux Klan, you know, there's less of that in Canada, but there's lots of forms of racism, absolutely.
Well, Jeff, you know, just like in France, one hears that most of the immigrants there in Canada are, of course, French-speaking. Quebec, of course, in North America, a region from where the maximum number of radicalized men left to join Islamist terror groups. We're also hearing the rise of Islamophobia in Quebec. Certainly, again, we don't have a motive yet, but one can certainly draw conclusions that this recent terror attack could be because of Islamophobia. That province, is it more prone to tolerance, or rather intolerance, than some of the other parts of Canada? Your thoughts?
Yeah, there is something a little different about Quebec. I mean, it's the French-speaking part of Canada. They identify more as secular. They've had incidents of Islamophobia before. Elsewhere in Canada has seen them too. With the niqab in the federal election, that was an issue that really resonated there. There has been, you know, an attack. There was like a pig's blood that they threw on a mosque. So, I mean, you know, really horrible stuff. And yeah, there is a bit of a different strain in Quebec. And I don't want to limit it only to them, but there is something a little bit distinct about Quebec's Islamophobia.
All right, again, we have the number 6 people killed in that mosque, and, you know, the Prime Minister, they're calling it a terror attack. Now, opinion polls recently are also showing possibly a downswing in Trudeau's popularity over the last few months. Now, do you think that the recent chain of events happening there could, you know, hurt his image? Or what is that like for Trudeau in the coming days with what has exactly happened this weekend there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors that will determine ultimately his popularity. I think that after this, I'm curious to see what the Conservatives will say to him. I'm curious to see more about the story. I mean, there are still facts and things we don't know about it. So I think in the days to come, a lot still has yet to be determined.
All right, now, well, let's get some more perspective about what's happening in Canada, just so we don't lump Canada and the United States together. Of course, both in the continent of North America. Well, Canada took in more than 300,000 immigrants, 321,000 specifically in the period of 2015 to 2016. That's according to the latest government figures. Now, this is the largest number of immigrants there since 1910. So there's more minorities there that could make up as much as 40% of Canada's total population within the next 20 years by the year 2036. Now, in a recent report, the government agency Stats in Canada say the number of Muslims, Sikhs, and Hindus will rise from 9% now to more than 13%. Over half the immigrant population will be from Asian countries. European immigration will drop, though, from 30% now to half of that, about 15%. And over a quarter of the population will have a language other than English or French. That's happening there right now. So let's get our guests back into the conversation. We'll start with Shivs, who's here in the studio. quite a bit alarming there, the difference between the United States and what's happening in Canada with the rise. Certainly, Canada seeming much more welcoming to take in more refugees and immigrants, and the U.S. on the opposite end of that spectrum.
Quite right. Of course, you know, to be clinically sort of cold-blooded about this, the fact is that Canada has faced fewer problems in terms of numbers of the minorities and so on, as well as, you know, for obvious reasons, the U.S. being a superpower, it has been far less of a target of terrorism than the United States has. And in terms of even percentages, perhaps the minority question and this kind of feeling against the other that comes up in countries, especially at a time when the economy is not growing, when the boats are not being lifted by the waters rising. Canada is in a far more fortunate situation. I think, having been there and having served in Washington, I think your Canadian panelist was quite right. Racism in Canada exists as it exists just about everywhere on the planet, but it is far less overt than the counterpart on its south. But you know, the worrying thing is that worldwide, especially in the Western world, there is now, as everybody knows, a rise of nationalism, which quickly deteriorates into jingoism among political parties of the right that are actually gaining ground, gaining resonance among the population across Europe. And you know, while at the moment the numbers may not lead to this kind of a white supremacist backlash or anti-immigrant backlash in Canada, if you go by countries in Europe which till yesterday were beacons of liberalism and today are worrying about the right-wing backlash in their countries, you know, it all depends on whether Canada manages to continue with its liberal traditions. But, you know, we have to keep our fingers crossed, given the current wave of populism and nationalism defeating those who are the protagonists of liberalism, inclusiveness, you know, the kind of defining democracy not as majority rule, but as the humane treatment you accord to the minorities in your population. You know, in this tussle at the present moment, nationalism, populism, xenophobia seems to be winning out. So the jury's out. I mean, keep your fingers crossed.
We'll have to find out what exactly happens and if Canada will end up winning, perhaps taking some of those immigrants that the United States refuses to see. Let's now go back to Mandy Clark standing by in London. Mandy, with regards to this discussion, when we talk about immigrants specifically, you know, we just heard that stat, the number of Muslims, Sikhs and Hindus, that's going to go up in Canada, and about 40% of the population there will be minorities. Quite an interesting juxtaposition to see that the United States is restricting a certain group of immigrants, kind of ironic given that the United States is a country built on immigrants, but Canada seems to be on the opposite end of that spectrum. You've lived there, of course, and sort of seeing this, what are your thoughts when it comes to the immigration situation? Is the United States' loss Canada's gain?
Well, you must remember Canada is population, now not the size of the country, but the population is tiny compared to the States, and it is always needing more immigrants, more people to fuel the economy. Canada still very much sees as the immigrants, it's the backs of immigrants that build the country, that build it up, that make it stronger. Has a very strict immigration policy outside of the refugees. You know, to get into Canada, you have to have a pretty strong skill set. So there is racism, absolutely, but it is, and it is polite racism, it's not overt, but there is a slightly different attitude towards immigration, certainly at the moment, that they are needed, they are welcome, and that has been Canada's just naturally leftist. It's a leftist country in most of its leanings. In the Liberal Party that is ruling, Justin Trudeau's party, it leans to the left. So it's a default of the country in many ways. Certainly, the conversation, whether religion it's a largely secular society. You don't hear conversations about, you know, there isn't that strong Christian tradition that you see in the southern states. You don't see that so much in the politics of the Canada. So, Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, people don't, it's not as big a deal religious-wise, but as the population changes, and if there's going to be a massive turn in the makeup of multiculturalism, then I think you will see, Canadians worrying about the future of their country and what it will mean in the long term for them when, certain populations become a minority, not a majority.
Right. All right. Thank you so much, Mandy, for your perspective, sharing us that insights from London. Let's now go back to our guest, Yudhvir Jaswal, joining us from Canada, rather. Talk to us a little bit about, this interesting juxtaposition, as we just asked Mandy, when it comes to how the United States and Canada are dealing when it comes to refugees, when it comes to migrants, when it comes to other populations trying to make a land of an opportunity in Canada.
Very different perspectives and very different way of dealing with the refugees, as you were already mentioning. I'm glad that you're not clubbing together North America. Being from here in Canada, I've always said that Canada is very different from United States. So when you club it together, you can't really feel the perspective what Canadians feel about these current issues. Starting with refugees, as you've already mentioned, if you simply talk about the Syrian refugees, Canada has accepted almost 45,000 refugees since the Liberal government has been elected. And when you compare that with the United States, I doubt they have been accepted more than 10,000 refugees. Then second important aspect that you have to make sure that was quite clear, contrasting styles of leadership this weekend itself. When Donald Trump, he put a ban on 7 different countries. Over here, our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he was clearly welcoming all these refugees, and he said, whether you are from whichever faith, background, we will certainly not discriminate against anybody. And I heard Mr. Menon, he was saying that let's keep our fingers crossed. I don't think so. We need to really keep our fingers crossed, because we clearly need to understand that the Canadian style of governance is totally different. I heard you guys talking about the conservative leadership.
Right.
Only Kelly Leach was one of the only leadership race contenders. Kelly Leach was saying that, yes, we need more vetting as far as we need more screening for the immigrants. But other than Kelly Leach, Maxim Bernier certainly doesn't like this idea. Lisa Raitt, she didn't like this idea. One Indo-Canadian, Deepak Oberoi, he certainly condemned that. So I don't think so that Canada, and most importantly, I've heard all these discussions, it's too early. This is all speculation that it's a right wing or let's not get into those details right now. It's too early.
Wait and watch and find out what exactly the groups are. We don't know that information just yet, but certainly a very interesting discussion. We can certainly continue this conversation, but we are out of time. We want to thank all of our guests for providing their perspectives. And before we leave, talk about the impacts now. And it's too early to tell, as we mentioned, if Donald Trump's ban on Muslims entering the U.S. could affect students here in South Asia. But there are some signs that many are apprehensive about heading to North America. Zeba Khan explains.
Students in India are still coming to terms with the implications of President Trump's temporary ban on Muslims entering the US. But agencies dealing with student visas say these are early days and one needs to wait and see how the US policy evolves.
He's certainly creating an impact, that's for sure. If you look at it, there are about 40 countries from where Muslim students come. The countries he's targeted are 7 of them, so it's not a huge number. I think the first thing we would really say is that, look, let's wait and watch. We cannot really predict anything at this point in time.
The students are divided in their opinion over immigration ban. While some are planning to pursue their area of study in a country other than the US, many are positive that things will improve.
In my point of view, this is the situation that has been given by the president is very wrong, because we Indians are thinking maybe this is not for us and it's only for Muslims, but it will affect in a way to our country also.
I'm not applying or aiming for US because I will be feeling a little uncomfortable there when the ban has happened, and it's not safe for Muslims or Indians.
It might not. It depends on the applications and the universities, how they take it on further. So I wouldn't say that they would reject it. I wouldn't say that they would accept it. I would just say it's a 50-50 chance.
Statistics of the last 2 years shows that the US remains the favorite destination for Indian students. In 2015, 148,360 students went to the US for higher studies. This figure went up still further to 194,438 in 2016. Comparatively, numbers for Canada are quite low. A little over 44,000 students in 2015 and 49,420 in 2016. With the newly elected United States President Donald Trump tightening the visa regulations, student community of India expresses concern at their prospect of seeking admissions in United States. Whether this immigration ban in United States will hamper academic institutions from getting the best of talent is yet to be seen. This is Zeba Khan for WION with camera person Ajit.
Well, we'll have to wait and watch to find out what impacts it'll have to students, visitors, immigrants, and those who live in the United States and Canada. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas. I'm Archit Seshadri. Thanks for joining us.